Do you feel like you're just going through the motions in life? This podcast is for you. A while back, I felt just like you. It wasn't until I heard that whisper in the wind, Nadine, learn to podcast. Now I'm on a journey of discovery, interviewing others who have also leaped into the unknown. I'm Nadineo, creator of the Over 50 You Are Not Done Yet show, a podcast about personal awakenings, spiritual connections, and stories of joy. Shall we begin?
Well, with Hopkins, I worked with him in the gym before his fights. A fellow named Danny Davis and I worked maybe 4 or 5 weeks with Hopkins before he went to camp.
Where was that?
Camp, he usually went to South Beach in Florida.
Mm-hmm. And when you worked with him here, where?
It was in the Upper Darby Pal on Westchester Pike. Mm-hmm. And when he fought, he would fly myself and his cut man, Leon Tabbs, out to the fight. Mm-hmm. Now, when I worked in the corner, I was the fourth guy. I made sure everybody knew when the round was about to end. I made sure the equipment got up into the corner. I made sure Bowie Fisher, who was the head trainer, who was up in years, was able to get up and down the steps without any problem. During the fight, if I saw something, I would tell Bowie, I said, look, I think I see so-and-so's dropping his left hand or his right hand, and everything worked really well. It was the best corner I ever worked.
Today's guest is former public relations, marketing, and advertising employee for Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, otherwise known as Septa, but it is his parallel career in boxing as a trainer and cornerman that piqued my curiosity. His name is Frank Friel from Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, and he joins us today in this episode affectionately titled, Keep Your Chin Down and Your Hands Up, on the Over 50 You Are Not Done Yet show. Shall we begin? Who is Frank Friel today, or however you would sum yourself up?
Well, right now I'm a retired person. I spent 23 years in the transit business, but I also spent 30 years in boxing. A lot of that was parallel. I did both at the same time. Kind of ironic, when I was going to school, I majored in English at college, and I really wanted to be a sports writer, and I wanted to cover boxing. I was always interested in boxing. I never thought I'd be working boxing like I did. It turned out instead of covering it, I was part of it for 30 years. And during that time, I was able to hook up with Bernard Hopkins, who will be in the Hall of Fame, who has set records in boxing that may never be broken. And it was just an amazing thing to be with him these years and to work at that level, which I never thought I'd be working at. But that's the way it turned out. I was in the right place at the right time. And Bernard and I hooked up, and we got along pretty well. So I worked with him for 8 years, and it was quite an interesting experience. And looking back, there's no way I would have traded working in boxing with just being a sports writer. That was one of those early things I wanted to do. But as you grow older, you realize that's not something I would have liked to have done.
Where did your passion for sports, or boxing for that matter, begin? Who inspired you?
Actually, I think it was my father. When he was a big sports person, not that he was a professional athlete. He came from Ireland, and he liked boxing and wrestling. And when I was a little boy, he used to bring me home copies of Ring Magazine when I was very young, and I used to look at them and look at the pictures. And I think at that point I developed a fairly strong interest in boxing that carried throughout most of my life. And then I got into it in 1979, just also by accident, because I was working at Septa. And someone asked me to do public relations for one of our bus drivers who was a professional fighter. Jimmy Sykes was his name. Mm-hmm. So I started to do that, and then I became his manager. I was going to do that temporarily until he got a permanent manager, and that mushroomed into 30 years.
Mm-hmm. What was it about Jimmy Sykes that made you want to coach him?
Jimmy was a nice guy. He was originally from Florida, and he and I got along real well. And he apparently was having a problem with his manager at the time, so I bought him out of the contract for an exorbitant fee of $600, and I told him, okay, Jimmy, now you can get your own manager that you're comfortable with. Because I wanted to see him do well. Apparently, he had some kind of ability. I watched him fight a couple of times. And he called me up 2 weeks after I had given him his contract from his old manager and said, I want you to be my manager. And we just got along real well. And from there, I met a great trainer named Jimmy Beecham, who started to train Sykes, and Jimmy and I started a boys club in 42nd and Lancaster, and it just grew from there. You just guys that we had as amateurs became professionals, and I became a cut man, and it just kept progressing and progressing. And I didn't realize it was going to turn into something like that, but it did.
Now, wait a minute. You went from being a trainer or a manager to a cut.
Yeah,
How did that happen?
Well, I managed Jimmy, and then we had a trainer. The first trainer was Frankie Anselm, and Frankie apparently didn't get along too well at certain times, so he kept telling me there was a good friend named Jimmy Beecham, a great trainer, and we brought him in, and Jimmy and I got along real well, and some of the young fighters that we had at the boys club were turning pro. And Jimmy was the trainer, and he said, look, one of us has to become a cut man because we can't afford to have a regular cut man all the time. Mm-hmm. So I decided, well, I'll be the cut man. Mm-hmm. I was lucky in the sense that one of the cut men that we were using, Eddie Aliano from South Philly, who was one of the top cut men in the business, took me under his wing and taught me how to do it, stuff I had to use, how you work the corner and all. And from there on, I became a cut man for our fighters, and then sometimes I'd be a cut man for other fighters too. I did cut work for about, I guess, a total of 22 years altogether.
You're listening to the Over 50, You Are Not Done Yet show. What is that like? I mean, it seems like it would be a messy job.
It's very messy. I have to be honest, I never liked to do it because you're dealing in blood and assorted body fluids. And it's one of those things where you're expected to stop each and every cut. And you could stop 10, 11 cuts in a row, and then you can't stop the next cut. And all of a sudden, this guy's not so good anymore. He can't stop anything. Luckily, I never had a fight or lose a fight because of a cut in 22 years. But it's not, you don't make a lot of money at it. The money I made was mainly coffee and sandwich money. I did it because Jimmy and I needed to have a cut man because we couldn't afford one, and so I continued to do it. And I guess I was fairly good at it, but I never really enjoyed it because it was messy and you're dealing in blood, and you have to be careful.
So, along those lines, what would you say was your most memorable cut man or cornerman experience?
I definitely remember this fight. I was cutting it for a fighter named Tony Green from West Philly. He became the number 2 featherweight in the world, fought for a world title in '95. We fought a fellow named Pedro Arroyo. It was down in Atlantic City. I guess it was at Resorts. It was a 10-round fight. It was a main event. He cut Tony early. Tony started to bleed over one eye. Pedro Arroyo was one of the dirtiest fighters I ever worked against. He committed every foul in the book. I mean, he would be warned for holding, he'd hit low. He'd be warned for hitting low, then he'd use his head. He opened a second cut over Tony's other eye. And so I had 2 cuts going, and then he cut Tony on the lip. So there's 3 cuts going. I was able to keep them all under control, but the referee wasn't really helping us out. We were telling him, you got to rein this guy in. He's out of control here. I remember the referee told me, well, I'm keeping an eye on it. I said, well, that makes me feel a lot better, yeah. And we're going into the 8th round now. Tony is winning, but he's all chopped up. The white corner jacket I had was covered in pink splotches because of all the blood. And I was worried I was going to run out of coagulant because I was using it in all these 3 cuts. And finally, in the, I guess it was the 8th or 9th round, Tony slipped on a moist spot in the ring. He was kneeling in an upright position, and Arroyo kneed him in the head. And we just erupted in the corner, like, what is this? Finally, the referee turned to Arroyo and said, I'm taking a point. And Arroyo, I got to hand it to Arroyo, talk about chutzpah. When the referee said, I'm taking a point, he looked around and said, what'd I do? After committing umpteen fouls. So the fight ended, Tony won, but it was really it was a messy fight. And the 3 cuts at one time, it kept me busy, and luckily we were able to keep them under control. But that was the one I'll never forget, that one. You know, there were other bad ones too, but that one was the most, was the bloodiest, and took up a lot of coagulant and a lot of concentration to get those things under control.
Gotcha. So for a cut man in the corner, what would you say are the main elements you have to have? Or you will always, I don't know, you just always have?
You have to be low key. You have to be calm under pressure. Okay, that's the first thing, because you only have approximately 45 seconds to do your work if the guy gets injured. There is a 1-minute rest between rounds. However, at the 50-second mark, they tell you to clear the corner. And if the round, let's say, had ended and your fighter was all the way diagonally across the ring, you got to take into account he's going to use up maybe 3 or 4 seconds getting back to his corner. So you only have about 45 seconds to do whatever you got to do. So you have to be ready to get in there and do it right away. You can't think, well, what am I going to do now? Should I do this? Should I use that? You just have to be ready, and you have to keep aware of the timing in the round. You have to know when the round is coming to an end. You can't get involved watching the fight, watching what the guy's doing right or wrong, because if you do, you're going to lose track of the you're going to lose track of time. Eddie Aliana told me that. He said, don't worry about what's going on as far as technique. You just worry about time and get ready to go once that round ends. And that's the number one thing. You got to be calm under pressure. You just have to have your stuff ready, and you just have to go in and just start working. Okay? That's the number one thing a cut man has to have. And he has to have good stuff too. He has to have the coagulants, proper coagulants, and the sponges and all. You can't just go in with a towel and some Vaseline and hope to stop a really bad cut.
Like what you hear? Subscribe, like, and share this with your friends and family. Do you find that movies get it wrong sometimes when it comes to the role of a cut man or a corner man?
Well, I think when a movie portrays any business, it's always a little bit over the top. It's never exactly the way it is. Whether it's a cut man or a police officer or a lawyer or whatever, they always have to sensationalize it a little bit in order for people to come and watch it. I've watched some movies. I don't go to a lot of boxing movies, but, sometimes you have like the stereotypical, what they think a cutman is with the swab sticking in his ear or he's chewing it like a toothpick in his mouth and all of that. And the other thing is that cutmen do not or should not say anything to the fighter. Only one voice in the corner, the trainer. You don't have 2 or 3 guys talking to the fighter. One voice, That's the trainer.
Why is that?
The fighter only has, say, 45, 46 seconds or 50 seconds to absorb what's being told to him. Mm-hmm. And he's always he's in a state of agitation if the fight is really tough. Mm-hmm. So he can only listen to one piece of advice from one guy. You can't have three guys telling him different things. Mm-hmm. If I said anything in the corner, it would be just to repeat what the trainer had said so that the fighter can absorb it and put it into play the next round. You have to be... everybody in the corner has a specific job to do, and that's what you do. You don't try to do somebody else's job. Mm-hmm. When we worked with Hopkins, we had 4 guys in the corner because there were always 4 title fights. All 4 guys had specific jobs to do, and that corner worked, I'd say, as well as any corner in boxing, and we had a total of at least 120 years experience in that corner. Mm-hmm. And everybody just did what they were supposed to do. Everything worked just like clockwork. I've seen other corners where you got 2, 3 guys telling the fighter different things, and it's kind of chaotic. The fighter is confused, and you got to stay calm, and you got to be relaxed and just get the message across to the fighter so he realizes, okay, I got to do this one thing that they're telling me to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, what role did you play with Hopkins, Bernard Hopkins?
Well, with Hopkins, I worked with him in the gym before his fights. A fellow named Danny Davis and I worked maybe 4 or 5 weeks with Hopkins before he went to camp.
Where was that?
Camp, he usually went to South Beach in Florida. Mm-hmm.
And when you worked with him here, where?
It was in the Upper Darby Pal on Westchester Pike. Mm-hmm. And when he fought, he would fly myself and his cut man, Leon Tabbs, out to the fight. Mm-hmm. Now, when I worked in the corner, I was the 4th guy. I made sure everybody knew when the round was about to end. I made sure the equipment got up into the corner. I made sure Bowie Fisher, who was the head trainer, who was up in years, was able to get up and down the steps without any problem. Mm-hmm. During the fight, if I saw something, I would tell Bowie, I said, look, I think I see so-and-so's dropping his left hand or his right hand, and everything worked really well. It was the best corner I ever worked. There was no question about it. Mm-hmm. And also, when we fought in Las Vegas, our motto was act like you've been here before. We didn't get overly excited. We didn't jump up and down. We expected to win. If we did, fine. If we didn't, we didn't. Mm-hmm. Everything was under control. And like I say, it was at least 120 years of experience in the corner. And it was an incredible experience, I must say.
So going from public relations and a film coordinator / trainer to cornerman, cutman, what would you say was the thing that surprised you the most about that journey?
I guess the fact that it happened at all, and the fact that I was doing both things kind of at the same time. I never expected to be working in boxing that long or at the level that I worked in, and I guess what surprised me was I was able to do it because it took up a lot of time, because I was younger then. I'd leave work and go down to Atlantic City when we would fight, and I'd get back to Philly 2:30 in the morning, have to get up and go to work. And I look back on that now, and I'd say, wow, did I really do that? Did I put in all that time? I guess I did. But when you're young, when you're younger and you have a really like a passion to do it, you don't really worry about those things. You just do it, because down the line, if you wait and wait and wait, you're not going to be able to do these things, So I look back on it now and I said, man, I'm glad I did it. But boy, I know at this point in time, I don't know if I could do it again. When you're older, you have to do other things. But that's, I guess, what really surprised me about the whole thing, that I did it and for all those years.
Now, there are many boxers that you have worked with that did not reach the level that Bernard Hopkins did. Why did you continue to work with those kinds of boxers of that level?
Well, sometimes you form a bond with a lot of the fighters, and hardly anybody ever reaches the level that Hopkins reaches. He's just one of a kind. He's just unique unto himself. I worked with a lot of good fighters. Tony Green was a really good fighter, fought for a world championship. He didn't win it. And I worked with guys whose names nobody would ever recognize, okay? But there's a certain camaraderie between you and most of the fighters and the trainers, all right? It's like a fraternity, sort of, you know? And it's nice to be involved in that kind of feeling. And we're all from different backgrounds. But all of that was removed when you're working. In other words, a lot of times I was the only white guy in the gym because I worked in inner city gyms for 16 years. But it was not a big deal. It was like, oh, yeah, well, that's Frank. Well, he's working with those guys. You know, you're all in it together. That's the thing. We're all in this thing together. No matter what you look like, we're all in this together here. And we all have to see if we can get this kid ready and hopefully win, and maybe he makes a few dollars. A lot of these kids didn't make much money. I mean, you don't make much money unless you really are fighting main events, you know. And it was a way to just sort of... help these kids along and help them, and you bond with them, and they're you have a nice kind of feeling when you help a guy out, and they appreciate it also. See, that's why I did it. I certainly wasn't about the money prior to Hopkins, because I really didn't make any money prior to Hopkins, you know. But that's, you know, it's a sport, and or it's a game, what they call it, the fight game. And it was interesting because you meet a lot of characters. I always like to meet different characters, and some were not really nice guys, but it was interesting to meet these kind of guys, because you say, well, I've heard about these guys, read about them, seen them in the movies, these types of guys, and actually some of them do exist. You know what I mean? It's like, man, it's like I'm in a movie with a lot of characters that I wouldn't have normally met in my course of working at Septa. You know, it was like working in another world almost. It was kind of neat. You know, sometimes it was very aggravating, but it was different, and it was full of experiences that, they were entertaining, and I'll always remember some I try to forget, but I can't.
I think you mentioned before about meeting Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Jean-Claude Van Damme, that was the last film I worked on. It was called Maximum. It was released, I think it was called Maximum Risk, I believe. Yeah, we shot a PSA with him up at York Dauphin, where he was, which was actually the scene where they were shooting the last scene of that movie. Yeah, it was interesting working with him because he muffed his lines 8 or 9 times before he was able to say it correctly, reading it, which was very unusual. But I also did work on one of the Rocky movies. It was Rocky 3 or 4. We did
cool.
We did some electrical work on Yale for that particular movie. Yeah, working with actors and all was kind of interesting. Not that we really got that much involved with it, but we were able to see all the activity that went on at these at the set, which was actually the L station at York Dauphin. You know, so that was an interesting thing, and I liked it. Working with film people sometimes was also could be a little aggravating, because they felt that we existed to provide sets for them when our main purpose was public transit. You know, that was what we were there for, not to provide them with sets. But we did whatever we could, and we worked on a lot of movies. I mean, Philadelphia had a big movie industry. It still does.
Sure, yes.
You know, yeah, it was... I tell people I met Jean-Claude Van Damme, and they say, wow, what was he like? I said, well, he was a little on the short. He was kind of short, but he was very friendly. But not. I don't know whether he could read English that well or what. It was just. It was an amazing situation.
More coming up. Could you describe the difference between like trainer / cornerman / cutman?
A trainer is a guy who will work on technique with the fighter. A trainer sometimes is also a cutman, but usually they will employ a cutman during a fight because the trainer wants to concentrate strictly on what the fighter's doing in the ring. Mm-hmm. And he wants to be able to tell him what he's doing right, what he's doing wrong. Mm-hmm. The cutman should just be concentrating on the fighter's face, not what he's doing right or wrong, to make sure that if something is starting to look kind of hinky, he gets ready to work on it, and he also has to be cognizant of the time of the round. Mm-hmm. The manager is basically the business guy who makes the fight, engages the fights for the fighter. Now, sometimes the trainer and manager are one and the same guy. Mm-hmm. Usually not, though. So there's usually three separate entities in the corner, mm-hmm. And each person supposedly just does what he's supposed to do. That way, everything works out well. When you have guys who want to do everybody else's job, then you run into a little bit of a problem.
Gotcha.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to be clear about that, how it's all broken down, so I don't mess that up. The sport of boxing, I've noticed that a lot of boxers are pushing the envelope in terms of how long they stay in the business. Where the boxers are getting older and older, or they're holding onto the gloves, or getting into the ring way beyond what maybe some people might say is too long. Not to point the finger, but have you noticed a difference, or are we just more aware of the effects of boxing and players?
If you take Bernard Hopkins, for example, actually he's probably a bad example because he's just a unique person. He's the oldest guy ever to win a legitimate world title. I think he was almost 52 years old. Mm-hmm. The reason some guys last longer is because they avoid taking physical beatings in the ring, and they can last longer than a guy who is just walk-in fighter who takes a lot of punches to land one punch. Mm-hmm. The more beatings you take in there, the shorter your career is going to be. Mm-hmm. And the shorter your career is, the less money probably you will make. Mm-hmm. But guys who take care of themselves can last longer. I wouldn't recommend anybody, though, boxing professionally after the age of probably 33 or 34, because you got to take into consideration the amount of sparring that goes into preparing for a fight. Mm-hmm. That could be, you could spar 90 rounds, 80 rounds before a big fight, and you are absorbing some punishment during sparring. Now you're wearing headgear and the gloves are heavier, bigger, more padded, so the impact is reduced, but it's not eliminated. Mm-hmm. You want to try to make whatever money you can make and get out relatively healthy. The problem is nobody knows down the line how your brain has reacted to the activity you subjected it to. Professional football players now, they come to realize that it's just not concussions, it's that constant banging that they go through. Mm-hmm. And the brain, the reason it's encased in a thick skull is to protect it from trauma. And if you subject it to trauma over and over and over, I think you can see there's going to be some problems down the line. Mm-hmm. And some of these things do not turn up under normal like, for example, EEGs. Cats can't determine that CTE, which affects the brain. The only way you can find that out is with an autopsy. Mm-hmm. So you have to use common sense and say, look, I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible, get as much money as I can while I'm young, and then that's it, I'm gone. Mm-hmm. Because once you have damage to your brain, you can't reverse it. And the only thing you can hope is it doesn't get worse. But you're rolling the dice in martial arts, whether it's boxing, whether it's hockey, whether it's football, any kind of contact sport. Mm-hmm. You're subject to trauma, and it's rolling the dice. And you know that going in, and if you're willing to gamble, well, that's on you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you might get through it without any problem. But if you look at some of the guys who are still relatively young and they can't count to 10 without stuttering, I think mm-hmm. that's an example that you got to take into consideration. I might be putting myself in harm's way here. I might want to get it done and over with as soon as I can.
I think about one boxer who got out of it fairly early, Oscar De La Hoya.
Oh, yeah. Oscar made a lot of money. Oscar, 10 years ago when Bernard fought him, or 14 years ago when Bernard beat him, was worth close to $200 million. Mm-hmm. And he won a lot of titles. He was a good fighter. A lot of people never gave him the credit that he deserved because he was a nice-looking guy and he spoke well. And I believe he's also in the Hall of Fame. But he was able to get into other businesses. He invested his money and brought in business managers to steer him in the right direction, and he built an empire out in California. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, he's still in pretty good health. Mm-hmm. He put on some weight, but he's in good health. And down the line, will he be like that? I hope so, but mm-hmm. there's no way of knowing 10, 15 years after you retire, 20. When the aging process kicks in, sometimes these things in your brain are like termites. They come out, right. So
Bernard is doing fairly well as well.
Yeah, Bernard is doing real well. He does commentating for HBO, and he's very sharp business-wise. He has a lot of money now, and he knows where every dollar is. He runs everything like a business. He's the only fighter I ever worked with. At the end of the year, I got a W-2 form. Wow. The only person that ever sent me one of those. He is a lawyer, an accountant. Everything was done professionally. Everything was buttoned up. And when we went to Las Vegas, it wasn't, a lot of people think, oh, it's champagne and strippers out there. No, it's all business. You go out, you do the job, and you leave. That's the way he operated. And that's the way he operates with his other businesses. I think he has some real estate. I think he had a car wash up in Fairmount. Yeah, he really put himself together after doing five years hard time. Mm-hmm. Turned his life completely around.
That's pretty admirable.
He had this just incredible desire to turn his life around. He said, I could either have been a career criminal, choose that, spend most of my life in prison, or I could choose to box. I had a choice, and I made the choice to box, and I did it 100%. And he dedicated himself, and he just had tremendous self-discipline, tremendous work ethic, plus he had tremendous physical gifts as well. Mm-hmm. And I would say without question, he's the greatest fighter born and raised in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. His body of work is just amazing. I spent all my life in the city, even though I live out here in Upper Darby. I don't consider myself suburbanite by any stretch of the imagination.
Were you born here?
No, I was born in Southwest Philly. I lived there for 30 years. And came out.
Your family is from Ireland?
They're from Ireland. My mother was from Northern Ireland. My father was from Donegal, which is in the Republic of Ireland. Yeah. Yeah, my aunts and uncles were all Irish. I grew up in an immigrant family, and as a lot of people did in Southwest Philly at the time. But I like it out here. It's quiet, but I still go in to Philly because that's my thing. That's where I was spent most of my life, you know. And then I spent time talking to you here. That's what we do.
That's what we do.
And I work out occasionally in the garage there. You know, you've been out there. You've seen the stuff.
Yeah, well, you helped me out. You taught me a few different types of boxing hits, I guess you would call them. Yeah. And how to hit the speed back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give information to people who ask me for it. I don't, you know, try to go up to people and say you should be doing this or that or whatever. If they ask me, I'll tell them what I think might work for them, you know. And because I've spent 30 years in gyms, you know, not just boxing gyms, other gyms too. And I've seen all kinds of guys, big guys, little guys, strong guys, guys on steroids, guys who are not on steroids. And, you know, you pick up a lot of stuff, but you never stop learning. I mean, I still pick up stuff I didn't know about, you know, because you never stop that. There's always things that you pick up. Like one guy told me when I started out, he said, look, Frank, nobody knows everything about boxing. You know, nobody. And that was true. Even older guys would tell me, hey, I just learned something about this or that, you know. So you always got to keep, if you stop learning, well, then I don't know. It's time to just, I don't know. Just go away, I guess.
Go away. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter on our website at over50youarenotdoneyet.com. The link is in our show notes. What do you do to stay fit?
Well, I try to watch what I eat. I'm not a food faddist, but I try to eat fairly good food. Try to eliminate, not eat a lot of junk food. Once in a while, I eat some junk food. And I do a lot of walking. That's the number one thing. I like to walk, and I do work out in the garage maybe twice a week. And when you get older, you have to kind of accommodate the fact that you're not as strong as you were 30 or 40 years ago. Sure. You know, you just have to work at your level and just try to progress a little bit here and there, you know, just a little progression. So it's always good to progress, because if you don't progress, you feel, oh man, I'm going backwards, you know. Just a little progression. Maybe you do an extra one repetition on a particular, or maybe you lift a pound more. It's just some small little thing. You say, yeah, see, I'm a little better than I was last week, you know. And try not to let your ego run away with itself, because with guys in gyms, that's usually what happens. The ego takes over, and it can lead to injuries, and you can wind up looking really, you can really look foolish.
And also, as we get older, we think we can do everything the same as we did before. Like several people that I've known, their parents have fallen with issues of unstable balance. And I think we take that for granted.
Yeah, with older people, balance is a major problem. And I think there's 3 reasons. 2 of them you can correct. 1 you really can't. Well, the legs are weak. You can always strengthen your legs. The balance itself is off, and you can improve your balance by doing balance exercises, relatively simple exercises. And then the 3rd one is poor vision. And you can correct that up to a point, okay? But if you neglect all 3 areas, then you see people who just shuffling along, and the least little dog runs across their path or something, they'll be all off balance. Yeah, balance is something that can definitely can worked on and can be improved, because I know I fell down some steps in the house here coming down, and I saw it 10 years ago, not holding on to the railing, and I tore my quad tendon completely in my right knee. And it took 6 months for me to get back to 100% on that. Yeah. Now I have, it was a wake-up call because I didn't have grab bars in the shower, and that's really dangerous. Now I got 2 of them in there now, and I got 2 handrails, and yeah, you have to, I realized, look, accidents are going to happen, especially when you get older. So you want to try to minimize the possibility of that happening. Because sometimes accidents can be, they can kill you, really.
That's true. Definitely true. Well, Frank, thank you so much for your return visit.
Okay.
Much appreciated. And,
well, like we say, keep your chin down and hands up. That's what we want to
That's right.
find.
Chin down and hands up.
Ass off the floor.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and stay up to date on new guests on our show and activities you can get involved with. Most of all, never stop learning. Keep moving. And if you're over 50, you are not done yet. I'm Nadineo. Until the next time, be well.